Hi, I'm Avery Artaz, and I'm in Gina Warren's English 101 class. So, my presentation, Killer Minds How Trauma and Choice Intertwine, is basically on serial killers and whether they are born or made. Now, a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect, how personal choices can impact serial killers, some biological factors, and then I'm going to go over two main serial killers, which is Jeffrey Dahmer and the BTK killer. Now, what exactly creates a serial killer? Is it trauma? Is it mental illness? Or could it be something else? And why do people with similar struggles never become violent? Well, serial killers are shaped by a mixture of mental health issues, past traumas, and twisted thinking. And while a lot of experts focus on those things, like childhood abuse and neglect, it's just as important to look at how personal choices and harmful ways of thinking could potentially play a role in their violent behavior. In the study, use serial killers' psychological and criminal profiles. Maria Garcia, who was one of the authors, found that young serial killers will often show signs of antisocial traits that can be connected to early trauma and personality disorders, which indicates a strong link between damaged development and later violence. Now, her exact quote was, "In this sense, juveniles who experience a variety of antisocial risk factors, such as mental health issues, upbringing problems, a history of substance abuse, and prolonged criminal participation, are characterized by a profound impulsiveness, emotional instability, and a total absence of guilt with respect to the execution of a crime." Now, in the study Jeffrey Dahmer's Psychopathy and Neglect, Tamara Higgs, who was the author of that study, found that due to the lack of parental attention and emotional isolation, he ended up losing empathy and gained an obsession with control. Now, a quote from Jeffrey Dahmer was, "I always knew it was wrong. The first killing was not planned. I was sort of morbidly curious. It became a compulsion." Now, I feel that this quote shows that he knew what he was doing was wrong. However, he did choose to ignore it and he chose not to seek help and he chose to continue killing. Now, Tamara Higgs stated in the same study, individuals' behavior can be changed based on positive, negative, and neutral reinforcement. Meaning, if you positively reinforce your child, they could come out with a more stable, kind of better life. Whereas if you negatively reinforce them, they could become more violent and have like a less good life than they would if you positively reinforced them. Now, many young serial killers share traits, and Maria Garcia points this out. She says that many show impulsiveness, emotional instability, and no signs of guilt. Now, the lack of emotional control combined with like a bit of a missing moral compass can really make their behavior very unpredictable and very dangerous. Now, another quote from another study was that trauma can lead to detachment and violent habits. And another pattern in is early trauma, like I just said from the quote. And when children experience stuff like severe abuse and severe neglect, it can kind of distort how they think and how they form relationships and how they process emotions and deal with anger, which in turn makes them a bit more violent and a bit more unpredictable. All right, now for the BTK killer or Dennis Rader, which is his name. Now, I feel that the Dennis Rader case kind of helps prove that not all serial killers are necessarily as broken as people seem to think, because he made very deliberate choices to feed his dark and gross fantasies, which isn't just because of trauma, but because he really embraced dark thinking. Now, a quote from the book Inside Criminal Minds by Same Now. is many criminals will adopt a selfish mindset, ignoring right from wrong in favor of their own desires. Their crimes will often reflect years of distorted thinking and poor decision making and not just bad circumstances. Now, a quote from Dennis Rader was, "I'm a monster, I know that," which again, I feel like helps prove that he knew what he was doing and he knew that it was wrong, yet he chose to continue doing it and ignore that it was wrong and continue killing. Now, I have a little bit of a chart here. So unaddressed trauma can lead to aggression and a bit of a detachment from reality. And psychological wounds may not directly cause someone to kill, they do lay the groundwork for dangerous patterns to take hold. Now, in this little statistical chart, it's reported abuse, general population compared to serial killers. Now, the very first one, which is physical abuse, has much less of a regular population and much more serial killers. Same with sexual, same with psychological. Now, neglect is about half and half, and then no abuse, which is pretty expected, has a lot more of just the general population than it does serial killers. Now, this is not everyone in the whole world, so this is not like 100% accurate or anything like that, but it does go to show that serial killers do tend to experience more abuse than the general population. Now, from the book Inside the Criminal Minds, Stanton Same Now stated a few things. He stated that criminals will often adopt a selfish mindset. He stated long-term distorted thinking can lead to harmful actions. And he stated that they will reject right and wrong in favor of their desire. So I feel what he's basically saying is yes, abuse affects serial killers, if trauma affects them, neglect affects them. However, they can choose to get help and they can choose to not just kind of ignore how bad what they're doing is, and they can choose to not have as much of a selfish mindset. Now, trauma is not the whole story. So, trauma influences behavior, but it does not control it. Because that can be said about a lot of things. Because you can have two different people who experience the same trauma, but one of them turned out to be a serial killer, and one of them turned out to be like a really successful, really well rounded person. As my second bullet point says, that personal decisions and belief also matter. And many people do face trauma without actually becoming a serial killer. So, trauma and choice. Trauma does lay the groundwork. So, it's much more likely that if you had a traumatic childhood, that you will become a serial killer. Not necessarily that if you have a traumatic childhood, you will, but if you choose to not help yourself or help with anything, then you could become one. Now, distorted beliefs and choices can activate violent behavior, and ignoring one side gives kind of an incomplete picture. Now, what that means is like, say you're a serial killer and you have this one side of your brain that's like, it isn't bad, like I have to do it, but then you have this other side of your brain that says this is really bad, we need to get help. Now, if you ignore that side, it really just gives that incomplete picture and it just gives this like inability to stop because you won't get help. Now, some final thoughts. Now, these profiles I feel tell us that serial killers aren't necessarily born bad, nor are they really necessarily made bad by trauma. They're often like very deeply affected by internal struggles and external struggles like trauma and stuff like that. Now, I feel understanding this really helps us to not only kind of analyze their actions and figure out why, but also thinking about like early intervention and support systems that could make a difference and could lower the rate of serial killers. Now, serial killers are not just victims of their past because they choose to ignore empathy and they choose to feed their violent thoughts and they choose to like not go out and seek help or anything. However, understanding both trauma and choice will help to prevent future violence. Now here is a bit of my works cited, all of the studies that I used, all the quotes that I used, and that's the end.